Welcome back, everybody. I know it's been a while since my last presentation, but as you'll see shortly, I've been busy as ever making new connections and trying to figure out how I could possibly put all this information together in a way that's both entertaining and hopefully fairly easy to understand. Now, before we jump back into it, I just want to mention a few things first that I think are an important foundation to build from. And I'd like to start by saying I by no means claim to have all the answers, and I consider myself a lifelong student. I'm always learning more and connecting new dots, and along the journey I may come across new discoveries or evidence that shows me I was wrong about something. And if that's the case, as it certainly is from time to time, I am very willing to change my mind, and I think that's something we can all learn to be a little better at. So I just ask that you be open-minded despite how hard to believe some of this material may be. Because even though I can admit a lot of this sounds far-fetched, I put in a lot of time to show the evidence of why I think the things I do. I'm just trying to do my best to inspire people and show new perspectives that can lead to happier and healthier lives, much more connected to Mother Earth and something far bigger than just themselves. Like most of you, I've suffered immensely in life, but it's the pain and struggle that pushes me to make these discoveries, and over time, grow stronger and wiser with a completely new outlook on life and myself and the universe in general. I've struggled with horrible depression, addiction, disease, loss of loved ones, lack of purpose, and unbelievable family drama, you name it. But I can say without a doubt that I wouldn't trade it for anything, because in my quest to find something to believe in and search for new ways to just feel happy and alive, the things I've discovered in the process are just so mind-blowing and incredible that I never imagined I would be here today, feeling this good and with this much gratitude just to be alive and to be able to share my findings with all of you. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I've reached some enlightened level in life where I don't suffer at all anymore, because I'll tell you straight up, life is hard, we all know it, and challenges come and go constantly, but I do know that when troubles do pop back up, as they inevitably will, I don't struggle near as bad as I used to, and I've learned to see pain as an opportunity for growth, and for those situations that are beyond my control, I just do my best to accept them and keep my mind focused on staying productive in one way or another. So with that being said, I do want to add that while I surely don't consider myself some fully enlightened, all-loving guru, I do believe that I have indeed achieved minor levels of enlightenment, which have resulted in absolute bliss or sudden life-changing epiphanies. And that's one of my biggest driving points in life, is to try and show others that this is very plausible and realistic for them too. I think it's something we as souls are just destined to achieve. And just a heads up, I have to cover a ton of information in a fairly short amount of time considering. So the pace will be pretty rapid, and you may need to pause it sometimes in order to really let the information sink in. Or you might also get overloaded and just need to watch it in sections, so try to keep that in mind as I go. So without any further delay, let's get back into the wonders of our scientific spiritual world. Okay, let's go ahead and have a quick recap of some of the key components we've covered so far, starting first with those snowflakes I grew so fascinated with. We learned about sacred geometry and how everything seems to stem from infinite cubes and spheres from the flower of life pattern that connects across the entire universe like a fractal web. Walter Russell shows in his diagram a basic layout of how cubes and spheres and their intersections are the basis of all form in our experience. Another good quote from Russell, he says the cube and sphere are the sole working tools of creation. Then you can see how the black cube is like the hidden father forces that govern the universe, and the white spheres represent the worldly living forces. I really love the pictures in the bottom left, showing how Muslims worshipping the cube at Mecca form a circle around it, and then you see in the image next to that, a cube-shaped magnet with iron filings around it that naturally form a circular magnetic field. To me, that's just such a powerful metaphor for the electromagnetic forces that make life possible. Next, we've got images from my good friend Gabriel, who runs Light as Consciousness. And here he's showing the flower of life from around the world with some guarding lion's paws over top of them, like keepers of life's greatest secrets. Here's a quick video of the spheres coming together to form the flower of life, and then it shows how the platonic solids stem from the flower, which have been taught as the building blocks of light for thousands of years. And it took me a long time to really understand these platonic solids, but once you start seeing them more and more in this kind of work, they become easier to comprehend, and you'll also recognize their underlying influence in structure and nature. They're all about compressing spheres filling their volume, and they each have equal sides. So you've got the first, which is the most basic three-dimensional shape, known as the tetrahedron. Then we had the hexahedron, or simply a cube, the octahedron, the dodecahedron, and the icosahedron. You can also see the platonic solids at the center of compressing bubbles, helping to show the relationship to spheres. These images of electron refraction show the platonic solids within their formations. This is called the E8 figure, discovered by Garrett Lisi, and has become pretty well known as a fairly new theory of everything. And though I wouldn't say a theory of everything is right, it does have a lot to offer, and as you can see, it looks quite similar to Russell's design of cubes and spheres. This video shows the E8 in different dimensions and how it's based on nesting torus fields to explain in very simplistic terms, but you can check out his work for more if interested. Here you can see a spiral and cube or square relationship as they are added together to form the Fibonacci sequence, moving infinitely closer and closer to the golden ratio. Let's not forget that these spirals are naturally formed by magnetism itself, which the ferrocell lens shows so well in the image on the left. Then on the right you see how they manifest in our body's torus or aura. This is one of my favorite simulations of magnetic forces at work, and since our heart is electromagnetic, I think it's a great way to help visualize the pulsing motion of our torus as it spreads out in a spherical bubble, then returns and repeats the cycle. In this incredible artwork by Alex Gray, I believe he is showing third eye awareness of these spirals flowing through his center. Here we get a simple reminder of how nature's most basic form is to bubble and become a sphere. And then when you cluster spheres together, you can see how there's a cube at the center. If we look closely at this video of a yin-yang in 3D, you can see how the two inner circles are just one sphere cut in half and twisted to the other side. Spheres within spheres. The quality isn't so great in this next video, but here we have Frank Chester showing his discovery of how the heart is based on a cube at the center of our chest.
So if the form is the heart and it's in a cube, and you put the cube exactly in the middle of our body, that's why it's on the left side. And I read 30 books on this before I came to this conclusion. And what they say, the doctors say, is that the heart sits at 45 degrees from the front and from the side and from the top. And if I show you this, that's 45, that's 45, and that's 45, and that's 45. That's root 3. That is root 3. And that's why the doctors all think it's at 45. Another reason why there is a cube relationship to the heart.
Frank also shows his sculpture of the heart's torus field and says it's a lemniscate, which is a figure 8.
You see the two different sized circles that are in here? That's a lemniscate in there, which has those two arcs. And this is flowing, one is flowing this way, one is flowing this way. This one's going out and coming around into this one, and this one is going around and coming into this one.
I think this kinetic art display of two fans spinning a figure 8 of tape is a good analogy for the polarity spinning the torus in a figure 8. Kind of like the discharging pattern of this artwork to the left and right of the chest. Another great clip of Frank shows how there's a turning inside out flow of the torus, basically where the inside is forced to spin and become the outside as it repeats the cycle.
This is a torus, and a torus shows the inversion, or fire. So if I turn this inward, okay, that's what smoke does, huh? When it comes up, or an explosion you see on TV, same thing, that's an inversion, fire, warm. All right, so an inversion of a cube. Isn't that wonderful what he did? Fantastic.
And I know this is a confusing concept, but you could think of it sort of like a hypercube. I think the way that these acoustically levitated water drops show how they oscillate and flip back and forth in opposing geometries offers clues to the toroidal physics. Now that we've had a brief recap, let's get back into learning about Kundalini and the many aspects that come with it, including this caduceus symbol and how it seems to be the symbol for health for a very good reason. And I previously broke it down as the life force energy of consciousness itself, and how we can learn to use our mind's focused attention and intention to drastically improve our mind-body connection, overall improving our health. This is accomplished first and foremost, in my opinion, due to what Bill Tiller proved in his book Conscious Acts of Creation, that energy does indeed flow where attention goes. And just like when we hit our thumb with a hammer, it starts to hurt so much more when we focus our attention on it, because our brains literally compress surrounding electromagnetic fields to a certain extent. We can use this knowledge to gradually learn how to harmonize our inner and outer worlds. And this took me a really long time to grasp the concept, but in my case, I was beginning to feel so compressed by this energy swarming inside and outside myself that I feel like I was basically forced to adapt and learn from my pain or simply continue to suffer. The image here is one of my favorite documentaries called Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, and it's a must-see if you haven't already. I feel like this art is a great visual to help comprehend the inner worlds, outer worlds concept. The way it depicts the awakened chakras within while also being surrounded by a balanced torus field within sacred geometry, connecting the inner and outer world. The late great Manly P. Hall used to teach how the original chakras are in the brain and begins with mental stimulation, then reflects throughout the body. This is a key aspect to understand, and hopefully I can elaborate as we go. Though you can have a third eye experience in many ways, I've had the most success personally and with teaching others by simply learning to place your attention out in front of you into one point, and try to keep your mind as still as possible on that focal point. Just think for a moment about how our brains are designed for gathering information by seeing what's in front of us. So we're just trying to capture this energy in its most natural state. And since our pupils are like little black holes sucking in energy and feeding our brain with a constant flow of information, you can learn to see this vortex of light energy as it's being channeled into your mind, and you come face to face with the present moment like never before. This art by Amanda Sage seems to portray this concept of a balanced mind, resulting in balanced chakras throughout the body. The yin and yang at the top would be like your right and left eyes or brain hemispheres, and you've just got to find that equilibrium in the center where your mind communicates with the spinal cord. I like to use the train tracks analogy, where you place your attention into the vanishing point, right where the two tracks disappear into one. And you can imagine white light or streaming water, even a train, or just whatever helps you focus on that energy being channeled into your mind center as it comes shooting down the tracks into your still mind. Just like when we use binoculars to focus out in the distance, it forms those central conical shaped lines, just like you see in our torus field. I think it's the still mind that allows the torus to flow with the least amount of resistance. I feel this physics toy is a good analogy for how the torus flows smoothly without resistance, but once our minds get all frantic and out of harmony with our body, it throws that axis of spin off alignment and results in unease in one way or another. If we can manage to still our focus and find that implosive alignment, we are basically observers at the center of not just our own toroidal hurricane or eye of the storm, but we are also embedding our energy fractally into the earth as well. And at the very moment that this sort of ignition takes place, it can have a slight sense of a roller coaster as that energy seems to increase in its rate of flow in a very tingly and enlivening way. Sort of like speeding down those railroad tracks, except it's more like the energy is speeding into your centered awareness rather than just moving away down the tracks. It can often look like a keyhole when you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that makes me think there might be a good reason for that. I just want to point out how when you first start getting the hang of this and learn to still your mind to a focal point where that energy starts to get centered, it'll probably start off pretty wobbly, but the more you practice and really hone in on keeping your focus as still as possible, it will gradually even out and get more smooth. Though even I still struggle with it from time to time, so don't get discouraged. Mostly depends on how well you can relax and just let go of tension and resistance. I think all of this finding your center axis of the torus is a good time to mention the esoteric principle called making the L. And since this is a bit confusing, I want to try and give some extra examples. The L refers to electricity, which naturally functions at 90-degree angles, which is why we walk upright at 90-degree angles to the earth, or trees prefer to grow straight up as well, or even lightning tends to strike down from the clouds at 90 degrees. Thus, the L of the electricity is a 90-degree letter. So the act of making the L requires you to use your focused intention, since energy flows where attention goes. Once again, you have to create an incoming spiral path for energy outside your body to move inside. So you just use your mind to create a spiral that moves right into the center of your heart, or just right into the place you're trying to move energy to. And once it enters the center axis of your torus, it basically gets sucked into your body's continuous electrical flow. It causes your torus to pretty much get locked into a centered balance. Just like you see there in the two vortexes meeting together, the energy will flow spiraling into one vortex and then move into the other. And this is also known as a 90-degree phase shift. I think this is why I naturally referred to bliss as a feeling I called electric love, because the feeling or emotion of love is directly related with electromagnetism. Emotions, or energy in motion, I've heard, are magnetic in nature. That's why your emotions can manipulate your field so strongly. What can really bring this together is just the fact that when we breathe, we naturally make the L. In relation to the two vortexes meeting together, I think when we're turned on, especially for men, it's extra obvious when you think about how an erection is in a 90-degree angle L to the body. And it's almost like a horizontal antenna in a way that channels energy right into alignment with the tailbone. And I noticed if you look closely at the spine as it comes right up from the tailbone, it has a very similar spiral formation to a water vortex, showing how our spines make the L naturally. And understanding this can help you with Kundalini tremendously. Another good tip I use to make this L phase shift is to first imagine your torus as having those polar vortexes straight out in front of you and behind you, rather than just centered above you and below you. And you basically just imagine the energy spiraling inward into the vortex, which would be centered at your heart. And as that energy spirals inward, you imagine the whole torus shifting so that the poles move into the normal north and south alignment, like you see in the video. And lastly, in relation to the L electricity, is something I mentioned in part 1 about how our babies are born with an average of 270 bones, and 270 is perfectly 3/4 of a circle, making a perfect L, if you see what I mean. It's said that Kundalini also means coiled serpent and lies dormant coiled around the base of the spine until activated. And it seems like this energy goes unused or unawakened in most people because they don't take the time to look within and find that sacred center that allows the spinal power to rise or spring forth. This is a view over top of the head showing the Vesica Pisces balanced center to help visualize it even more. Adding to what I said about binocular vision allowing your torus to find equilibrium, I found this diagram of binocular vision on the left that shows how the intersection point of our right and left eyes form a balance in the middle that takes the shape of an Egyptian ankh. And as you'll see shortly, that actually makes perfect sense when you see just how much that ankh shape is a part of us and has a direct relationship to electromagnetism. Now, starting with the ankh, I want to show you just how many sacred symbols or objects throughout history are all showing the same basic concept of balancing the left and right hemispheres to find that sacred center. Male and female, night and day, sun and moon, used over and over again. And though there's usually many different meanings in these kind of things, this inner balance certainly seems to be one of the main factors. Next, we've got the Ark of the Covenant with its wings as left and right brain hemispheres meeting together with the pineal gland in the middle. You can also see how there's people holding hands all around the outside, possibly portraying oneness. Big thanks to my friends at Welcome to the Golden Page who have made several of the awesome images in this presentation, and this is just one of them, showing how the pineal gland, when overlaid with the Great Pyramid, is exactly in the King's Chamber. And the King's Chamber contains a so-called sarcophagus, which many have theorized the Ark of the Covenant was once housed in. You can see here on the right in the middle is King Tut's headdress, which I think could be portraying the snake-like waveforms going throughout the center of our brain before being projected out the third eye as the bird, hence the snake and bird on its forehead, linking the inner and outer worlds. Next we have the Egyptian crook and flail, which I think are self-mastery tools and can be used either physically or mentally for balancing Kundalini in general. I once made a tool of my own that I eventually realized was actually a flail, and I made it just for the sake of swinging into my back so that I could increase my awareness of the spine's energy flow, or just enjoy how good it felt pressing into my back like that. And shortly after I made it, I experienced some synchronicity when I was meditating and had a bizarrely vivid visual of a big shepherd's crook literally reach out and move my chakras into alignment. And I know that sounds crazy, but since energy flows where attention goes, you can try it yourself and you might just be surprised. Just imagine a hook guiding your energy into place along your back. It's that simple. But if you look closely at the images, you can probably see what I mean, especially in the bottom left with the helping red hand popping up behind his back, ready to aid in aligning the spine. Here we have Osiris's crown and feathers, which I'm just speculating appears to show part of the dispersing toroidal pulse as it spreads out and above the head, similar to the physics of a smoke ring. And just considering it's called a crown, just like our crown chakra, and is also symbolized with feathers, possibly representing the rising energy, it does seem to be possible. Sort of like the Tesla experiment where he uses a torus of electric coils to make an egg balance and spin, I'm thinking it's this balanced energy of our brains that allows our crown chakra to be centered. The balanced egg seems to go well with the concept of the halo as a torus-field. Just imagine that radiating halo as a warm ring around your head, keeping your brain's magnetic fields nice and balanced. Adding to the egg and crown chakra connections, here's a Masonic statue I covered in part 2 that seems to be showing that same basic idea. Next we have Moses in the Red Sea, with the sea possibly being metaphor for swirling currents of energy. And the wilderness is like overcoming man's lower nature so that the mind isn't struggling to find balance. Moses' staff is theorized by many to represent the spine as well. You could also think of the spreading of the sea as the currents between the left and right brain, as you see here. The story of Jesus I've already covered quite a bit in part 2, but there's plenty of examples here if you'd like to pause and read them. Adding to the Jesus story, you can see how the Jesus fish overlays with our visual pathways in the brain. I mean, after all, he is the light and the sun, right? We've also got the Holy Grail, and this art shows the same basic male and female duality, and even shows what look like waves of energy on each side of the Grail. In addition, the Grail is the same shape of Coral Castle's symbol for magnetism. And I just want to note how the Coral Castle symbol consists of mirrored S shapes, so just try and remember that as we continue. Let's move on to the mysterious and widely misunderstood Baphomet symbolism. You can clearly see those Kundalini serpents on the rise, as well as the sun and moon symbolism for the brain. Not to mention Baphomet is half male, half female, clearly showing it's all about balance. You've also got the flame above the head for illumination, as well as the wings like the snake and bird relationship. Baphomet is also about reflection symbolism, and I noticed if you take a reflection of our brain scan from an MRI and overlay it with Baphomet, his horns match the curves of our brain hemispheres. There's also the Vatican statue, when reflected, reveals Baphomet. Next we have the Temple of Solomon, which as you can see is just the same sun and moon, male and female symbolism like Baphomet. And it's said that Solomon means soul of man, or woman of course, and since the body is a temple, it just makes sense that you'd find your soul within your own temple. Adding to the reflection symbolism, Baphomet reads backwards as Timopath, which is said to mean peace of the Father to all men in the temple. That doesn't sound evil to me, I don't know about you though. You can see the serpentine male and female duality in Japan with what could also be like the Egyptian red sun over top of the head. If you look closely at these images from around the ancient world, you can see how they are each holding out what appears to be at first glance just sacrificial offerings. I think another theory makes more sense, that they are showing the conquering of our beastly lower nature and learning to find the God self, as Richard Casaro calls it, or basically just finding that sacred center that we keep seeing again and again. Next we have Lord Shiva, which many think is usually representing destruction, but also symbolizes change and transformation. The classic dance of Shiva, with many people lined up perfectly behind each other so it looks like multiple waving arms of one person, could also be thought of as the dance of consciousness as you learn to observe the energy waving in your third eye. The destruction aspect could be the destruction of the ego, followed by the awakening knowledge that we are all one from the same source. Let's go back to the Egyptian Ankh for a moment and think how it represents both life force and possibly electromagnetic balance. Now consider how the sun on the horizon is a great example of balance by being not quite day and not quite night. And just like that binocular vision diagram shows, by placing our attention out in front of us, our visual centers get linked inside the Ankh shape. And the Egyptians depict this red sun not as full circle, but as an oval, just like the sun's refraction still causes it to look today, clearly showing us it's all about the sun on the horizon either setting or rising. Note the oval sun is also the shape of our head from the side view. I think there's a good chance that this concept of enlightenment could have once been even more practical, in the sense that you could literally bring more light into your body and convert it into pure enlivening energy. And what I'm getting at is the power of sun gazing. If you've never heard of sun gazing, it's quite simply when you have your bare feet grounded to the earth and stare directly into the sun, but only when it's on the horizon so that its brightness doesn't burn your eyes. You have to gradually build up a tolerance for this and only start out for 10 seconds at a time, but eventually, since your eyes are little black holes sucking in light like I mentioned before, you are literally drawing in the energy of the sun. The theory is that this has such an incredibly powerful effect that you don't even need to eat or drink anymore, and the documentary Eat the Sun covers this in depth and documents people doing it as well. There is of course controversy that goes along with such claims, but the evidence is quite intriguing in my opinion. But I caution everyone to do their own research as usual, because you can do real damage to your eyes, which I think might be because of how much radiation is in the air these days, unlike in recent history, and is also why I recommend seeking enlightenment as deeply in nature as possible, so you don't draw in unnecessary radiation. But since you need to be grounded to do this sun gazing, I think it's a good time to mention the soul, and soil connection, meaning that the soles of our feet need to connect to the soil of the earth in order to ground and balance our torus, or spirit, or soul in a sense, so that we can connect to the sun, which is soul in Latin. Try not to spend so much time in rubber shoes because it breaks our connection to the earth and thus to the sun in a way. I also think this is why Achilles' heel is just another link to Kundalini, because it's so easy to break that connection to the earth and thus the energy can't properly flow around your heels. I think learning to really feel your feet and legs is key to balancing your root chakra, because those currents moving through your feet and legs naturally center your torus around the root chakra. And if you're not properly rooted, you can't expect to grow nice and tall, you know what I mean? I also think the way Achilles says the words ache and ill with an S is a perfect way to think about how, if you don't have this proper connection, it can throw your torus off alignment and literally makes you ache and feel ill because that S flow can't find equilibrium. Next we have the Washington Monument, which if you see from an aerial view shows the circle and square relationship at the base, and then is surrounded by a Vesica Piscis showing that male and female balance once again. As I showed in part 2 of this presentation, the founding fathers of the US were Freemasons, who have enlightenment symbolism embedded cleverly into nearly everything they built, and I may have been fortunate enough to have made what I think is really cool discovery in relation to the Capitol building's dome painting called the Apotheosis of Washington. If you look closely, you can see the illuminated light source in the painting is actually the same outline as our cerebellum. And also notice how George Washington is sitting right where the spinal cord would be, and he's wearing a fleshly colored garment. So why is this significant? Well, we just have to remember one of the main attributes of Kundalini is how that blissful energy raises all the way up the spine and illuminates the brain. Here's a better image so you can see how the cerebellum is right where the spine connects to the brain. So this painting is basically showing a gateway up the spine. The Apotheosis of Washington also contains the same flower of life-based geometry that you can see as I outlined in the brain. My friend Luca Mancini of the Face of Life Matrix has some great work on the geometry of the face as well, which you can see how he shows the flower of life relationship to the face along with the Vesica Piscis. And apotheosis literally means elevation to divine status or deification. Looking even closer at the painting, we see Washington is on top of a rainbow, possibly symbolizing the ascension of all the rainbow-colored chakras, just like Jesus is depicted on top of a rainbow as well. Adding to the case, you can see in the diagram of the brain there in the orange rectangular box labeled the pineal gland, aka third eye, it shows that the pineal is directly connected to the cerebellum. You can also see where the banner hangs in the illuminated light is right where the pineal gland would be, and the banner reads E pluribus unum, possibly meaning of many gods, there's just one source that we all stem from, which this painting is portraying unification with. Since the cerebellum is responsible for coordinating muscle movements and is constantly communicating with the body, adding extra resistance in the process, perhaps by becoming calm and still in meditation enables the cerebellum to relax and allow that energy to accumulate and rise. It's just a thought. Next we have the Egyptian falcon, which I noticed overlaid nicely with the brain's ventricles. The ventricles are those blue bird-like cavities in the middle of the brain there, and they produce a liquid called cerebral spinal fluid, which many theorize floods the spinal cord and brain during illumination. Adding to the Egyptian falcon overlaid with the brain, you can see how there's 3 red ovals, with the main one being the third eye, and the other 2 are connected to the cerebellum. In the bottom image in the middle, you can see the blue liquid is highlighting the spinal fluid, and here's a short animation to help you visualize it further. And for the final connections to the apotheosis of Washington, I just want to break down the word cerebellum to see some interesting links. So cere of cerebellum means to coat and wax, and Kundalini is sometimes referred to as lighting your candle. And there's also the Kundalini fire as a metaphor for the intense rising energy, going well with the wax candle symbolism. The bell of cerebellum could be associated with the heart, and how Frank Chester reveals forms a vortex like a bell shape. Or you could also relate it to the harmonizing effects of sound, such as sound resonance from a bell. Then we have Elam of cerebellum, sounds just like Ilum, as in illumination. These might be a stretch, but considering all these connections, I figured it's worth a consideration. While we're on the Kundalini fire subject, let's go back to the Great Pyramid, which seems to reflect the fractal proportions of both the sun, moon, and earth, as well as man. And pyramid means fire in the middle. And as the golden page is shown in this image, the Grand Gallery is shaped like a flame, which goes so well with what's next. Just like that same basic geometry of the brain, if you look very closely to the X-ray of the spine, I couldn't help but notice even some of our vertebrae have those balanced polarities within them. And if you look at the middle, it also resembles rising flames, just like the Grand Gallery. While we're on pyramids, here's another discovery that really blew my mind when I saw how strikingly similar salt crystals are compared with pyramids. And considering a big aspect of Kundalini and enlightenment is called Christ consciousness, or crystalline consciousness, as I mentioned before, because you reach that balanced geometric state of order and equilibrium. Just think about that for a moment. The Christ crystalline symbology here is incredible. Not to mention how much salts play a role in the body chemistry of Kundalini. Like sol and salt is linked with the term salvation, or salivation as well. If you've never seen Lifting the Veil or Colin Smith's work on all these subjects and so much more, be sure to check him out. He goes into an insane amount of depth on all this and has taught me a lot actually, and continues to do so constantly. Adding to the salt crystals and pyramids connection, there's theories that they were all once connected around the world in a giant geometric grid known as ley lines, and you can still see tons of examples today of these straight line connections all around the world, and one pyramid or temple connects to the next. And what I found intriguing is that ley lines were also known as salt lines. Even today all around the world, there's still an incredible array of geometric grids connecting buildings and temples, and Scott Onstott's Secrets in Plain Sight series will really shock you if you've never learned about any of this. I find it most fascinating how much the United States is directly connected and aligned with Egypt. It's as if the US is one big dedication to Egypt. Proceeding with the pyramids connections, let's discuss this pretty well-known discovery that the Great Pyramid's coordinates just happen to perfectly equal what we define as the speed of light. And when viewed from above, in that right image next to the pyramid, it looks just like the Maltese cross. And the Maltese cross looks just like what is said to be the smallest image of light ever captured, which I've covered previously as being the single photon particle in the bottom left image. So let's get this right. The Vatican worships the cross, and the cross represents the light, which just happens to be the shape of a light particle, as well as the pyramid when viewed from above, also matches the speed of light too. That's all just too many coincidences for me. I don't know about you. And even though what they are saying is the speed of light is more likely the speed of mass, since light may not actually travel at all according to Walter Russell's theories, it still goes well together. Though that and what we define as a particle is a whole other topic on its own. But considering they call going to church as going to mass, it starts to make more sense. Another connection to the pyramids and light is how the golden page shows that the Great Pyramid's slope angles match the angles necessary for our eyes to perceive a rainbow. One more great image from the golden page shows how the pyramid sides are actually slightly concave, giving a total of 8 faces, or 8 visible sides, which he then connects the nodes to demonstrate how it forms the same 64 tetrahedral grid as the flower of life. The key here is to see the underlying square geometry, then put a sphere around each of the 64 tetrahedrons to form the flower of life. And since this adds to the cube and sphere relationship, let's go to the next link. This next image by the golden page shows how the Great Pyramid is centered right at Phi if you measure the longest strip of continuous landmass. And the pineal gland is also inside our heads right at Phi, so I doubt that's a coincidence. Next we have some brilliant work from my friend Clay Taylor, who has some really top-notch discoveries in art into the deep studies of light and magnetism at artofclaytaylor.com. But here he's showing the light refraction and polarization of a glass sphere reveals yet another link to the Great Pyramid and Phi. Now I want to show more connections on the Maltese cross and how it relates to the cube. If you notice, I made that sculpture there with the cones, and all it is a little cube at the center with a cone extending from each of the 6 sides. And if you look at it from the front view, you can see how it's actually the same Maltese cross formation. It's basically an implosive cube with vortexes on each side. The striking beauty of vitamin C under a microscope seems to show these same forces at work. You've got the implosive cubic cross at the center, with the circle or sphere surrounding it. Here's another clip of Frank Chester where he shows his design of an implosive cube, and it's basically like seeing it right before the vortexes fully form on each side. Continuing with the Maltese cross, let's first get a reminder of the geometry of the torus, known as the vector equilibrium, which stems right from the flower of life and also reveals the Maltese cross when you see it from the right angle. This next image ties in with the Maltese cross as well, though it's not apparent at first. You're looking at the awesome art designed by my brilliant friend Buddy James, which is basically the fractal grid for the sacred geometry within Birkeland currents. And I covered Birkeland currents in part 3, but for a quick reminder, they are basically like the electric or plasma-based currents, like filaments, that possibly link the entire universe together from micro to macro. Adding to the Maltese cross and its relationship to Birkeland currents, let's watch a quick clip from Maryland University when they discovered a new type of plasma-based fire that burns soot-free and spins like a tornado. And Buddy James theorizes that this basic spinning vortex is at the base of every Birkeland current. I noticed if we take that blue whirl flame and put 4 of them together, they form a nearly perfect Maltese cross and also have an Egyptian Ankh-like loop connecting them, possibly being a link to the implosive physics of enlightenment. You could think of each side of this plasma cross like Frank's cube as it's imploding towards its center. And finally, we have a quote from Dan Winter saying the spirit is a plasma donut, meaning our torus field, and you can see how the Maltese cross matches up with its 4-wave mixing or implosion model on the left. Now we're going to hopefully take all this information to the next notch and show how it reflects throughout the human body. First, let's get a look at the torus with each chakra as its own torus, all flowing in harmony as one. Let's look at Mark Rodin's torus math symbol, which represents the torus of course, and is the main angles that its vortexes flow in. And it's important to note that these angles are the exact same as the flower of life or star of David, also known as the Merkaba, among other names. So you can see here one of my favorite discoveries that really opened my eyes when I started picking up on it, how I took the torus symbol and overlaid it with several parts of the human body, showing how our bodies seem to form in harmony or fractally with this same geometry we see at all scales of the universe. We've got the rib cage, the main veins and arteries, abdomen and back muscles, our nose structure, the angles our teeth are positioned, the lungs and trachea, the ovaries, our brains, our heart, our optical nerves, as well as the eye sockets, down to our synapses and even our X chromosome refraction, hair follicles, our pelvis, penis, top-down view of the brain, also the vagina, the list goes on. You can also see these flower of life angles on the body from spherical packing or clustered spheres. Here we have those 2 tetrahedrons that come together to form the Merkaba or Star of David, which I'm just rotating to allow you to see from the side view to help you understand this next image. And this is from the Golden Page's discovery about how if you place a sphere inside of that same Merkaba form, and due to our perspective, the parts of the sphere that stick out like a 4-leaf clover there also take the form of an Ankh, as you see. Here's an image showing how the inside of the double torus pairs well with the pelvis. and the tailbone fits perfectly inside the cone-shaped vortex. And I just want to add that these are all just approximations and are not going to be perfect on everyone, but on average this does seem to be the case. Next I saw the inner view of our rib cage looked an awful lot like nesting torus fields. Let's move on to other connections in the body, starting with this cross-section view of our lungs and rib cage, looking at them from the top-down view. And that's the heart there in the middle towards the top, just to help you picture it better. I thought it was pretty awesome. Our lungs match the Fibonacci or logarithmic spirals, and I've got more to come on this. I had some fun on this one, and instead of Fibonacci I called it the Fibonacci sequence for obvious reasons. But either way, it is still interesting how well the female body flows with these natural spiraling curves. And here it's compared to Nikola Tesla's oscillator, which I really like how well it shows the looping action of the current. Here's another cross section of our lungs, but in this image I show how the heart is shaped just like the Ankh loop. You can see here how the cross-section of our lungs reveals the shape to be very similar to the yin-yang polarities, but more in a mirrored kind of fashion. Next I want to show how the smoke ring or fluid-like mechanics of a trailing jet are linked to the Ankh and yin-yang as well as cobra symbolism, which you can see in this statue of how the Ankh overlays so well with it, and the bar magnet of the Ankh fits perfectly in the tail's figure 8 shape, possibly symbolizing the figure 8 flow of a torus. So this seems to be showing an electromagnetic yin and yang balance, and when you also note the classic yin-yang symbol is an S shape down its center, and then we see the two mirrored S's on the cobra, similar to the coral castle mirrored S's symbol I showed you before. This is quite a deep piece of work right here. And just notice how the cobra also has a third eye, showing it's probably about enlightenment overall. Here you can see how if you cut a torus right at the edge of its center, its inner shell takes the shape of an Ankh due to perspective. Next we have more body parts that seem to be structured in harmony with this natural electromagnetic Ankh-shaped loop. We've got the head and face together, the optical nerve / visual pathway, the brain, vocal cords, heart, rib cage, the foot, and pineal gland or third eye, as well as the perineal muscles. Here's a comparison to show how similar the heart is to a pine cone. And I think the way the heart beats or fills up with blood then releases it could be like if a pine cone were to bloom and close rhythmically on each heartbeat cycle. This is a fun way to think about the heart's pulsing energy as it blooms outward. Next we have a discovery by Scientific Lee at the top, where he simply shines a light through a dark hole and shows how the light naturally loops back on itself in the shape of the Ankh. Then on the bottom, I noticed some pine cones when cut in half reveal an Ankh-shaped center as well. And this pine cone Ankh connection is very important and hopefully will make more sense as I go. This is just a picture of water splashing upward after dropping a little pebble-sized sphere into it, and as you can see it forms a slight resemblance to the human body, and naturally forms that same Ankh-shaped loop as the head. I think this is a great visual to help align your chakras as well, especially if you imagine it as yourself with your feet being connected and a part of the water that it stems from. I also think this relates to the Tesla egg spinning within the balanced torus field, and that seems to go well with this next video of a magnet being melted within an induction coil. The way that the magnet is forced to levitate by the electromagnetic field, then due to the conical shape of the coil, the magnet becomes the egg or Egyptian Ankh shape, much like the way I believe the vortex of our own torus field flows so well with our egg or Ankh shaped head. Next we have an image from the golden page showing how waves naturally arch in the shape of an Ankh. This image isn't related to the Ankh, but goes along with the fluid-like mechanics of nature, and you can see how similar tree growth can be to magnetic putty. Now we have the Egyptian Waz scepter, which here the golden page shows its standard size scales perfectly from the heart to the mind center, or from the mind to the heart center. And then on the right they show how that bird-like head of the Waz scepter is the same angles as on the chestahedron, the sacred geometry of the heart. So with this Egyptian Waz connection to the heart and mind, let's look at this next image, starting with the top left of the hieroglyph of the Ankh with arms holding a Waz scepter in each hand. I think this is showing that same balanced mind conquering our lower nature like we saw previously. And then in the image on the top right is the front view of a brain scan. And this is another discovery by the golden page, showing how those ventricle slots in the middle are like the two Waz scepters. So then I happen to see the image in the middle at the bottom from ancient Egypt showing the two Waz scepter halves as one. So I'm guessing whoever made the art on the bottom left was thinking the same thing, that these Waz scepters are the same third eye balance symbolism, but also showing that heart vortex awareness of making the L phase shift of incoming energy down through your neck and into the toroidal vortex in the heart center. In addition, the golden page shows how the Waz scepter is also based on phi ratio, and hopefully you know by now just how key phi is to all this. Next we see at the top how two opposing polarities of counter-rotating spirals along with clockwise rotating spirals come together to form a pine cone. And then in the image on the left is a diagram of our heart showing how the two polarities work together. And on the right is a 3D printed figure that shows how the middle connection of those polarities forms the Ankh loop. That 3D printed shape is also known as a cardioid figure, and this cardioid formation leads us to our next connection. Now, keeping in mind that looping Ankh formation which the Tesla oscillator shows so well, we're going to see how it links to ancient Egypt to the cardioid figure in fractals in relation to today's famous mandelbrot fractal pattern, which was the first fractal formation discovered by Benoit Mandelbrot back in 1979. The cardioid comes from charting multiplication tables, but it gets its name from its sort of heart-like shape, as in the cardiovascular system. At the top you can see how those arraying lines within the cardioid create an Egyptian Ankh, and in the bottom left you can see how the cardioid is the main body of the Mandelbrot fractal pattern. In the image on the right of Osiris, I was first intrigued at how much the Ankh to the right of his head resembled the arraying lines of a cardioid. And then I was really shocked when I noticed that the cardioid was actually on top of Osiris's crown, making a strong case that this is all related to enlightenment. Not to mention Osiris is green, the same color as the heart chakra, and the cardioid, as you know, is related to the heart. Here's another image by the golden page overlaying that Ankh with a third eye. Here's another link to the Mandelbrot fractal compared to the ancient Tibetan art on the left known as the rainbow body or light body, which William Henry teaches as representing enlightenment, and you can see it next to the Mandelbrot fractal as the Buddha as well. Now I want to cover more on the cardioid with a video by Mathlogger where he gives a basic introduction to how it's formed, and you probably first and foremost recognize it naturally showing up in light refraction on your cup of coffee, though you can't really see the loop formation showing up in the cup like this. Here he's showing how the light rays multiply together as they bounce off the walls of the cup. Then he shows another way to form it by rotating a circle around another of equal size, plotting it as it rolls. Or you can also form it by rotating a line that's half its circumference. Now, keeping this dual sphere relationship in mind, let's go back to that video showing a 3D representation of the yin-yang. And just remember how it's actually just a sphere that was cut in half and twisted as it rotated to the other side. I realized you could take a yin-yang and just twist the half sphere back into place and get a cardioid. Or put two cardioids together, which then becomes what's known as a nephroid, but is also the yin-yang, of course, or the Tao of Taoism. Next, let's take the cardioid multiplications and just keep adding more and more, and just watch the complex geometry that begins to reveal itself. Can you see how it starts to resemble that E8 figure, as well as those intersecting lines of Russell's cubes and spheres? You can also see that same pentagonal star pattern that planet Venus makes over an 8-year period when observed from Earth. And though I'm not sure if it's quite related, it's still interesting. I noticed you can make a new kind of yin-yang from a baseball, and just look at the image in the middle at the bottom showing how the lines intersect to form what looks like loops, though it's just due to our perspective. But if you recall that blue whirl flame that I put 4 of together to match the photon, you can see how similar the loop-like formations are to the baseball. Then to top it off, we even see that 4-leaf clover-like pattern in the sphere inside of the Merkaba or star tetrahedron we saw before. Just something to think about. Now back to the cardioid connections. I discovered the cardioid actually manifests in our bodies in several places. Here you can see how it matches the cross-section of our abdomen. You can also see it in the mouth and throat, which I link to our voices as a possible connection to the fractal power of sound, or the universal vibration of Om or Om. Om, I've heard, comes from the sound of all the vowels being put together, as in A-E-I-O-U, and as it resonates, it tends to have a natural M sound to it. See see what I mean? Next we have more of the cardioid showing up in breasts, the butt, vagina, and even the scrotum. Though it looks a little silly, you can still at least see the influence on the chin where the two sides come together. And if you look closely, you can see its rough outline in the spine's vertebrae, which looks a lot like the one in the throat. And then you can see its outline in the base of the skull. You can even see it in the cross-section of our eyes in this diagram compared to the cardioid light refraction at the bottom of this cup. Then also on the roof of the mouth, and remember the ankh and cardioid seem to be the same basic electromagnetic loop. So everywhere I showed the ankh on the human body before could possibly be a cardioid relationship as well. And finally, we have its influence seen all the way to the edge of our foreheads. Now I want to lead this into how the cardioid connects to implosion, or cavitation, which I have a short clip showing cavitation underwater here.
Cavitation bubbles are formed and collapse in detail. We can see the formation and the collapse of cavitation bubbles with a diameter of approximately 9 mm in slow motion. In real time, this process takes about 4 milliseconds, and it is a spectacular physical event. Because liquid water occupies many thousand times less volume than vapor, the bubble implodes. It first assumes a ring shape. Shock waves and a strong microjet are the result of a collapse.
I had a moment of synchronicity watching this video while having just discovered all this cardioid and human body connection stuff when I noticed the cavitation bubble actually takes the shape of a cardioid. In this next video, he explains how there's a vacuum effect of cavitation, which I want to try to tie in with the physics of our heartbeat.
When a cavitation bubble collapses, it generates a shock wave, then a suctioning effect that pulls anything close by toward it.
First, let's show how the heart's electrical system works to help further grasp the mechanics here. And I'm not going to bother with the specific names of each location on the heart, just so we can keep it as simple as possible. But just pay attention to the upper left corner is where the first electrical signal begins, then it separates and moves down into the heart. And once it reaches the apex or bottom tip of the heart, it splits into two and gets shot out in that W shape you see here. Look closely at how it has that same expansive and contracted state as the heart. And it's that force that seems to both fill the heart with fresh oxygen-rich blood from the lungs, then empty it all within a single second, then repeats the cycle. Sort of like that pinecone gift, though obviously not like a rocket or anything. Now if you look at how water pours out this bottle so slowly compared to how fast it pours out when you add spin, it just goes to show that when you throw in the spinning vortex mechanics, it all starts to come together even more. Next I want to show a clip from the Fields documentary to get a reminder of those opposing red and blue polarities of the torus, which I'll show how the cardioid links the two together.
Unless we properly understand this basic magnetic field structure, we will never be able to properly understand the fundamental forces of matter from the subatomic to the galactic.
Here's a simple GIF showing those red and blue polarities in their spiral form, and you can see that when they line up together, it forms the cardioid. So just imagine those two polarities of the cardioid as they align and return to the center from where they came from. There's basically just two directions here, and that's the centrifugal motion, meaning from the center, then is forced to return centripetally as it spins outward and reaches a threshold, or centripetally, meaning towards the center. Or even more simplified, you could just say in and out. For those into audio engineering, you may know the cardioid microphones, which seem to have a similar type of vortex-based design to them. And there could be some more connections to make here in regards to the power of sound, but for now I'm just throwing that out there. Next I just want to point out something that confused me for a long time, and that's how even though the torus of the brain seems to be on the horizontal axis, like you see here with the red and blue polarities of the torus being the red and blue male and female halves of the brain, it still functions with the torus of the body as a whole flowing on the vertical axis. I think Walter Russell understood this, and you can see in the painting on the bottom how he shows that balanced halo around the center of the torus. And if you also think about his choice of color as being purple, which is not only the color of the third eye chakra, but is also the color you get when you combine red and blue, it makes more sense. Here we have some more unique perspectives of the heart, which show how the inner cavities or chambers of the heart reflects the Sun, Earth, and Moon relationship in the way that it looks just like a moon crescent from the Earth blocking the sunlight. This image shows how Earth's magnetosphere has a similar formation to those heart chambers as well. Then we have an image that's basically just showing the similar spiral formations to the Milky Way and the heart. Next up is a really amazing link from the Golden Page between the heart and what's known as Lanikai, which is the supercluster of galaxies that the Milky Way is a part of. And you can see how the heart fits right in there from the side view. And finally, we come back to how the heart is electromagnetic. And considering all of these connections, perhaps the heart draws its main power from the fractal relationship to the electric universe. Now, keeping this electromagnetic power of the heart in mind, let's watch another clip from the Primer Fields documentary about the bowl-shaped electromagnetic fields of the torus. And this might help to explain what could be a huge discovery about the heart.
The fields around an electron, as well as around all other matter, are actually two opposing bowl-shaped electromagnetic fields.
Now, with these bowl-shaped magnetic fields in mind, let's get a reminder about how the cardioid naturally shows up in our cup or bowl-shaped dishes. In this video, I put two bowls together, one blue and one red, to help connect it to the torus. And though it doesn't have the hole in the middle like a real torus, it still shows how the light bends into a cardioid formation. But there's one point in particular here that I believe could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the heart. Though the bowl in the image is white here to help you see it a little better, you can still see that same cardioid formation, which hit me in a classic aha eureka kind of moment, when I remembered that that's the exact same formation as that moon crescent shape in the heart. Here's another Primer Fields clip showing how the magnetic bowls are incredible at propelling objects as if it's being shot right out the center.
We saw how these magnetic bowls will also eject matter at high velocities.
Now let's look at a diagram by Ken Wheeler, who is one of the leading specialists of magnetism. And I was really shocked when I saw this, because I had made my own models to try and describe how I felt these electromagnetic forces in my own torus field, which I used a fountain from my work and mirrored it, showing both the charge and discharge, or in and out motion, which as you can see matched so well with Ken's model. Looking back at Ken's diagram, notice that part in the middle shows that inertial plane, or just the middle line in between both bowl-shaped polarities, which he has outlined in red. So basically what I'm getting at is that our heart is just a reflection of this natural cardioid loop of the torus. The middle plane in between the polarities could be thought of as going right along with that horizontal bar magnet on the Ankh, or would be our shoulders as you see here from the Golden Page. Adding to the heart connections, these clips by Smarter Every Day show them firing guns in slow motion underwater. And though I know it looks a little cheesy, you can at least see how I noticed those shots ended up looking an awful lot like human arms to me. So it got me thinking perhaps our arms are designed perfectly with the flow of the racing blood that comes shooting out of our heart, with those electromagnetic currents of course. It's that natural fluidity of electromagnetism that I mentioned before. And going well with this racing blood through our arms, or body in general, I put this simple image together showing how the arms have a helical or spiraling nature to them. And this goes the same for the legs, though it's not as easy to show. Next we have a new amplified MRI technique that allows us to see more details. And this shows how the brain is forced to move a little with each heartbeat. It just goes to show how strong that toroidal pulse really is, and understanding this is key to really using this knowledge for your own benefit in more ways than you could imagine. This clip shows the other half of the torus that shoots downward and makes the blood go through the aortic arch here and all the way down through the body and into the legs. I've heard this aortic arch is even what defines most of our blood pressure and can be very problematic in high stress situations. So learning to relax and feel this energy flowing naturally can really help you to know when something is off and allow you to use your focused intention to bring that sacred alignment back into balance. Next is an image of Frank Chester's work where he shows how his chestahedron, the seven-sided sacred geometry form of the heart, can go from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. And in 2D is just like being drawn on a flat piece of paper. It comes from the center of 3 stars, which can then be folded up into 3D to form the chestahedron. So I think this concept of going from a flat plane of 2D to 3D makes sense if we think about that 2D inertial plane or flat center line of the torus would be where the 3 stars are. Then as the energy moves out from that flat plane, it expands into the 3D form. I think we can take all of this to the next level when we think about the heart's toroidal pulse as a lensing effect, just like the opening and closing of a camera's aperture. You see how similar the spirals are to the torus? Just think of it as those magnetic bowl shapes being a lens that forces electromagnetic charge to disperse. Next, we've got some great gifts of a pine cone and some fruits or vegetables, which if seen as a full scan all the way through each side in a rhythmic cycle, seems to show their hidden toroidal geometry. Now I want to show what seem to be golden ratio waveforms manifesting throughout the body. So if we take the top left image and see it as a 2D or two-dimensional golden spiral, then we see in the image next to that is that same spiral but from the side view. And then putting several of those spirals together, we get the vortex. But if we look at the center connection of two of those opposing spirals, you can see that naturally M or W waveform as I showed here. So this got me thinking perhaps that's why our body is covered in all these same M or W's as you see here in the nerves of our teeth, our heart, our lips and nose, outer rib cage and pelvis, vertebrae of the spine, inner rib cage, the skull, knee bone, finger bone, and really just most bones for that matter. At the top here, I've got the original pictures so you can see the outline better, but we've also got the brain as a whole, the inner skull, the ventricles, the thyroid gland, multiple back muscles, and the list goes on and on. I'm thinking it might also be the blooming toroidal flow as it spreads outward that makes these M and W waveforms. And this is a GIF of what's called fractal branching, where the energy literally just branches out as it spreads. If I pause it right here, you can see the M shape it makes. And this is just showing another image of that same fractal branching you just saw, but a different color. And I have in the image on the left the brain's ventricles outlining that M waveform. If you recall thinking of the brain as a horizontal torus, which one side being blue and the other red, this is just helping to see how this fractal branching could be spreading throughout our brains from the center of the torus. Now let's also recall the implosion or cavitation bubble of the heart. If you look closely, you can see it's also the same M or W waveforms at play. The fluid ring physics seem to show the fractal branching forces also, which goes well with the crown and feathers of Osiris. I've had many bliss experiences of Kundalini being so incredibly powerful that I was literally forced to say, oh my God, and I even started dragging out the syllables the more powerful it felt, till it sounded like, oh my God. And I know that sounds crazy, but when I thought about these M and W waveforms all throughout the body, it got me thinking that perhaps I'm just resonating with my most natural state of that universal vibration of Om, which our bodies are a perfect reflection of. I mean, we are made in God's image, right? So the O would be like the O or bubble shape of the torus, and the M sound would be like the waveforms. This next video is of a phenomena from a root where its unique spirals create a pressure condition that causes it to flow against the current in a very peculiar and surprising way. And this is a great way to think about how our energy is both expanding and compressing at the exact same time. This video by Josh Toms is showing the work of John Depew, who has a whole plethora of great information at coralcastlecode.com about the secrets of magnetism and light. And in this video, you can see how the energy is both coming and going at the same time. So when your torus pulses, you can think of the expansive toroidal energy as water moving around the root, forcing the contractive energy or the root itself to come spiraling inward. Or in the body's case, it would force your spiraling energy into the vortexes leading to the heart. I also love this gift from Dan that shows that balanced compression and expansion similar to a continually blooming flower. Next, we can get into some new links between the mind and body connection, starting with the way the curves of our hands match the curves of our brain, and especially the curves of our midbrain that connects the ventricles to the spinal cord. It seems the left hand flows with the right side of the brain and the right hand to the left brain. helping to make accurate hand-eye coordination, though it's really just a hunch based on how similar they are. Then we have the heart, which is known for being the size of a fist, and then I noticed if you remove that center line of the heart known as the septum, which is the black line in the middle there, it looks an awful lot like our fist or hands in general. So perhaps strength really does come from the heart, as the old saying goes. Adding to the hands and heart connection, I couldn't help but notice the striking similarities between this beating heart from the bottom view looking up compared to the squeezing motion of our hand. Maybe that's why we often place our thumb to our fingers like that in a classic meditation pose. Here's a clip from the Helical Heart documentary showing the middle of the heart if you unravel its outer muscles. And you'll have to excuse my scrawniness in this picture, but it's just to show the similarity of our arms and the way the heart's muscles naturally unravel. And if you notice how the heart's muscle fibers make an X as they cross over each other, I think this reflects in the body with our fascia meridian as you see here. That X formation could also be linked to the optical chiasm, or that part in our brain highlighted in yellow there that connects our visual pathways together. This next image is rough quality but still shows the basic layout for the polarities of the body by Dr. Jerry Tennant. But if you look at the diagram, you can see how the polarities switch from front to back, left to right, and top to bottom. But this can also help you to see that same X crossing formation of the torus. Adding to the X formation of the heart's muscle fibers, if you look closely at this image of the torus, you can see how it also makes that same motion in the middle. In relation to that cardioid figure I discovered in the heart structure, if you look at the heart from the bottom view looking up inside of it once more, just like we saw in the squeezing hand motion video, you can see how it looks just like a number 9 if you see it from the right angle. And this gets more significant when you see that it's also in our brain, right there in the midbrain that connects the spinal cord. And also if you think about how sacred number 9 is, and is even called the number of consciousness by some, Bill Donahue being one, there's some great videos out there as well, like the 9 code that shows how 9 is the key to the universe. Now, considering the number 9 in the brain is basically just a spiral leading into the brain center, I think it goes well in these next images that I showed in part 1, where you can see the underlying skull shape within the hurricane or galaxy or the nautilus shell. Next we have another clip from the Helical Heart documentary where they inflate a cow heart and deflate it while under an X-ray. And this heart is very much like our own, and if you look closely, you can see how it forms that 9 shape once it gets to its end. If I play it on repeat in a nice rhythm, you can see how it's actually like a beating heart motion from a unique perspective. Moving on, we have Gabriel Kelemen showing how he formed a human face through the power of cymatics.
And I obtained a structure pentagonal. After a few days in my lab, I was surprised. I appeared the human face. Fantastic.
And I was blown away when I first saw this. Notice how the eyes seem to switch from left to right in this oscillation. And I think that goes well with the yin-yang as the eyes, which I showed earlier, about how the middle balance would reflect throughout the body, balancing the chakras. I think the way the eyes of the cymatics face flow in that figure 8 alternation goes really well with this simulation of light moving through a glass sphere, making me think this could all be related to the spherical influence on the brain. And just look at the similarity between the sphere light refraction to the phi ratio symbol. Not to mention, as Illuminati Congo shows here, the phi symbol seems to be portraying a torus field as well. Now remember, he said he made this from a pentagonal or 5-sided shape with the 5 spheres as you see here.
And I obtained a structure pentagonal.
And this brings us to what I believe is another fear-based misconception that the pentagonal ram head is evil, which I'll try and explain with a few more images first. So here's what's known as the sigil of Lucifer, and as you can see, it's just symbolic of the natural angles of light entering our eyes. After all, Lucifer is the light bringer, right? Then you can see here how I noticed these same light angles of our eyes go right with the chestahedron, the geometry of our heart. They each have that kite-like shape within them, which makes me think it's another connection to keeping your focus into one point, because these angles of the heart and brain can reach a deeper state of coherence, meaning a deeper state of balance or organization. And not only have I heard similar stories, but I've also experienced this myself. When you manage to reach that waking dream state of deep consciousness, but you're still very aware of your surroundings, if you can manage to look into a mirror during this state, The way your brain processes the light is in a very unique state in the sense that you're not allowing your mind to create other images of what you think the light is doing. And you see more of it simply flowing in real time. And when this happens, you can actually see how the light moves in a pentagonal flow. And as that light comes streaming in through that ram-like star shape, the streaking light can look similar to hair blowing in the wind, much like the hair and long goatee of the ram's head. So as crazy as it sounds, your reflection can resemble the ram head in deep states of consciousness. But all it is basically crystalline light refraction in motion. You can see the pentagonal influence on the skull of infants as well, which seems to come from the dodecahedron, which is one of the Platonic solids. This image is from the Golden Page that shows how our DNA is pentagonal and comes from the dodecahedron as well. And as you can see, even our DNA matches well to the phi mask, or you could think of it as a golden ratio mask that defines the human face. Just goes to show how much that pentagonal star is an underlying geometry of the head and face, bringing this whole ram's head thing to a new understanding. And don't forget how I showed in part 2, our eyes have an underlying pentagonal shape that you can see in the iris. And phi, as in the phi ratio or golden ratio, is related directly to number 5. And I believe to repent is to be able to clear your conscience or consciousness and return to a state of pentagonal balance. That star-like geometry of the brain could be seen as a blend of both the 6-sided hex star or the 5-sided pentagonal star. And we all know pi, as in 3.14, well, when plotted out thousands of times, it forms this perfect pentagonal star. And since pi is all about the ratio of the circle's circumference to its diameter, this adds to the star and circular flower of life relationship and relates to the ramhead mystery, of course. You can see these same kinds of geometry in old paintings of Jesus and Mary, which I notice goes right with Dan's implosion model of nested Platonic solids. So let's go ahead and continue on with the mind-body connections. Here's that image again of how our abdomen cross-section reveals the cardioid figure. And if I outline it here, you can see how it resembles a head and shoulders with arms connecting in a circle. And I think this just goes to show how our body communicates with the mind and ensures that our movements are all synchronized. The orange there on the bottom right is what I call the ballerina pose, and it seems to show a similar toroidal influence in this structure. Here's another image from the Golden Page that shows how the shape of our feet is just like the shape of our brain, though they are balanced opposites. And if you look at how our lungs and lower pelvis have a similar outline as the feet, that just demonstrates how our mind and body coordinates with our feet. Now let's take a look at how well the center of the torus matches the curves and flow of our hands. And you can see how it flows so effortlessly around our arms. I believe our whole body has a similar flow like this. Even our bones have those underlying curves like the center of a torus. And as you see on the bottom left, the top view looking inside the hyperbolic shape looks just like that magnetic field flower-like structure on the far right when viewed under the ferrocell lens. Here's some more cube influence on the brain. I found this diagram showing the average angles of peripheral vision is 120 degrees, and 120 degrees is the same as a hexagon, which is the cube. And as you can see, our brain's cerebellum sits in that skull at 90 degrees, just like the corner of a cube. In addition, our eye sockets seem to be positioned in the skull at 90 degrees as well. So with the two 90-degree angles linking in the brain, I think this shows where the electromagnetism crosses the polarities to form that Ankh loop. And you can also see it in Jerry Tennett's diagram how the polarity changes from front to back and side to side. I think this diagram of the brain can help us to see it a little better. I also notice when I stand with my feet together, my ugly little toes seem to have that underlying 90-degree angle to them, making me think they flow right along with the brain. Now let's move on to the snake and bird symbolism a bit more. If you think of the body as a series of tubes and this constricting snake-like energy is blocking up that flow, then think of the bird as the overcoming of that constriction. And you can become lighter and free to fly with your body's tubes flowing in harmony. You can also think of the snake and bird as symbolic of that same basic charge and discharge, or centripetal, centrifugal, or in other words, the in and out flow of the torus. The snake is squeezing your energy back to the center, while the bird is expanding it and making it fly away. Just like I showed with Tut's headdress, you gotta find that center of balance of your third eye or mind's eye to take flight. But I find it especially intriguing how it's said that when we learn to raise Kundalini from the base of the spine and up to the brain to become the bird, when I first noticed that the cross-section of our pelvis under an X-ray, which is where the tailbone is, strikingly resembles a snake. And then on the skull, which I showed before, resembles that bird-like form of the cardioid, which I overlaid the same Egyptian falcon here to show another example. And don't forget the falcon also overlays with our brain's ventricles. And the midbrain from the side view also looks like a bird. So the snake and bird symbolism is pretty profound here, and there's still more to come. This art from the Golden Page shows an interesting correlation between the shapes of the snake and bird here. I'm sure you've probably peeled an orange and saw that nice S shape it makes, and this is the natural flow of a torus. You can also see a snake or cobra-like resemblance to the vortex of a torus, which is also like an Egyptian Ankh shape. You can also see the Ankh influence all the way down to hydrogen wave functions. And I found this image that seems to show man awakening to this toroidal nature as a form of evolution. But hopefully technology doesn't make us devolve like the last depiction illustrates. And thinking of the torus in its looping circular form, the connecting point of the torus from one end to the other reminds me of the Ouroboros, the classic snake eating its own tail symbol. In this image you can see how if I hold the torus at the right angle, it helps to see the cardioid phase it makes in its cycle. This next piece of art might be kind of hard to see, but if you look closely it shows a torus cut at an angle, and I noticed it reveals the cardioid from this point of view. It's just another way to help connect the torus and cardioid, because for myself it was very confusing piecing it all together. And this can really come together when we recall how our abdominal cross-section was a perfect cardioid. And if I were to overlay both sides of the torus together, you can see how it forms the cardioid as well. This shows how well our body is in harmony with the torus. For the serpent symbolism is also how Manly P. Hall said that many students of the ancient mystery schools were, or still are in some cases, known as serpents. Next we have the Mayan Quetzalcoatl, known as the feathered serpent, definitely bird and snake symbolism again. And then the incredible pyramid not only reveals a snake going up the side of the stairs during the equinox as you see here, but also is well known for making the bird chirping noise when you clap in front of it.
So there's a pretty cool trick you can do here at this ancient pyramid. If you stand by the steps in a certain way and clap your hands, you can actually hear an echo, but the cool thing about it is that it sounds like a bird. And that's on purpose because what you're hearing is the Quetzal bird, one of the most sacred creatures in the Mayan culture. Let's see if it works for us. You hear that? You hear it? Pretty cool, right?
I mean, how incredibly genius and advanced is that? And this I covered in part 1, but shows how the golden ratio compresses into smaller and smaller scales. Scales like the scales of a snake. And the torus from the side view looks like scales. The sound waves diagram there begins to resemble scales the more it compresses. And we also know that music is in different scales. Then we see how those sound wave scales overlay right with the flower of life, and not only look like our DNA double helix, but also like winding serpents. I even managed to find this MRI video that shows the heart beating with what looks surprisingly similar to a snake. We're getting close to the end, and so now that you've seen all this worldwide symbolism of enlightenment, let's take a look at how the Vatican seems to hide this knowledge in plain sight, as many are already aware of. So as Danny Wilton has shown in this image of Vatican Square, it's secretly portraying the human body, with the cross at the top overlaying perfectly with a third eye. And if you look closely at the monolith, which is actually directly from Egypt, you can see it's in the perfect spot for the lower Dantian point, or as I covered in part 1, the lower Dantian is the gut brain, or south electromagnetic pole of the body, aka the lower power center. So it's basically like the monolith is opening that power center. And since it's a power center, it's no wonder our umbilical cords were once attached there. And just look at the spirally nature of the umbilical cord. Seems like another case of nature naturally making that L into the baby's body. Then at the top in this image, it shows how the inside and outside of the Vatican's audience hall is obviously designed as a snake. Then at the bottom is that image I showed previously of the half man, half snake possibly overcoming his hellish nature. Next we see the Pope obviously holding a staff with Kundalini serpents, just like a caduceus. Sure makes you wonder. Then we see the Pope with serpents on his clothing, while holding what looks like an illuminated third eye symbol that's shaped like a Vesica Pisces, the balance point in between red and blue polarities. and in the bottom right it shows their pillars are obviously as winding serpents. Next we have a Jesus statue that I noticed had looked an awful lot like a cardioid behind his head as the halo. And then you can see the Vatican's largest statue, which is the pine cone I covered previously, that many think is symbolic of the pineal gland, or the pine cone-like flow of the torus as well. And that pine cone has a symbol directly over top of it that looks like a cardioid. On the wall right behind the pine cone there's another statue showing a similar cardioid-like symbol. And notice how the wings are shaped like keys at the bottom, probably for the cardioid bird-like expansion symbolism of the torus, as in a key to the knowledge of the torus. Let's think about how the pine cone is golden ratio, and that same flow scales all the way down to our DNA. Now notice the two peacocks with those mirrored S's showing up once again, possibly symbolic of the S flow of the torus, and the two peacocks also remind me of that same ancient symbolism we saw about conquering your lower nature to find that sacred center. In relation to the peacock symbolism, I also found this diagram showing how the eye-like patterns of their feathers are actually cardioids too. And when you think about how the peacock's feathers seem to be arranged in golden ratio, just like our torus fields, it all starts to come together really nicely. I think the way Alex Gray depicts an eye within each section here is his way of portraying awareness of this inner and outer energy flowing through him. And don't forget how the cardioid is just like our eyes. Now let's have a closer look at those mirrored S's. I remembered seeing them in an old Christian painting that shows those same mirrored S's around a chair that curiously has a book within it. And that book reminded me that Bill Donahue was quoted, "Kundalini is described in the Bible and is termed as the book of life." So I think this is significant because the book in the chair is probably symbolizing Kundalini, and those mirrored S's are just like the implosive forces of a torus or cardioid. I'll try and elaborate here. Recall the cavitation bubble, which I showed was a cardioid. If you look at this guy's tattoo, it's basically outlining those same spiraling currents, though I highly doubt he had any clue of this when he got that tattoo. And if you really look closely, you can see how it matches well to those mirrored S's on the pine cone. To top it off, I noticed a while back that my own chest had these spirals embedded within my chest hair. If you look at this statue of Osiris, you can see he's holding two ankhs that are positioned right where those rotating currents in the chest are. Now let's look at that statue directly in front of the pine cone, which to me looks like the third eye symbolism due to the vertical reptilian-like eye. Not to mention the statue is golden, and since the third eye is linked to the spirit or soul, and we all know the saying the soul is golden, that could be another connection as well. And when you think about how it's straight out in front of the pine cone, it makes me think that it could go right along with what I was saying about keeping your focus straight out in front of you during meditation. So you would be the pine cone and you're keeping your mind's eye or third eye focus centered on the eye statue. In addition, when you consider how the eye statue is like a broken clock, it might also symbolize the broken third eye connection that the Vatican has been keeping from everyone. Now, I'm not trying to go down the conspiracy route like I used to, but it's at least worth consideration based on all this evidence. You could even think of the large space surrounding the pine cone as your big aura or torus field, since you need to connect your inner and outer world or your inner mind with your outer flowing energy field. A lot of times we get so trapped in our thoughts that we're basically just swarming our minds with all that compressional energy rather than just expanding our awareness to reach more of the open and free bird state of consciousness. And I think this is one of the big reasons we get so claustrophobic, is because we can't expand those fields and they basically swarm us and add stress. If you could learn to reach that state of relaxed stillness and just be aware of the torus pulsing through you, you'd be absolutely amazed at just how fast and how large it can expand and return in a split second. You can actually feel it rise way up above your head, just like the statue above the pine cone is showing. And even though you may have your focus still straight out in front of you, this coherent state allows you to have sort of a hyper state of awareness, allowing you to still be aware of that toroidal flow above and around your whole body. And it's incredibly blissful feeling it flow through you and from your heart center like that. It helps to actually visualize a path for this energy to flow through, so you can practice trying to vividly imagine a large torus around yourself. And since energy flows where attention goes, you might just feel it flow perfectly within that expansive field in your mind's eye. But don't forget that once this initial implosion takes place, and you feel that centering, slight roller coaster force upon your body, You can just completely let go and allow yourself to merge with that feeling of oneness. I once was so lost in that feeling that when I snapped back into my body, I thought only like 20 minutes had passed. But I was shocked to see that 4 whole hours had passed. It's just the homiest, most comfortable feeling you could possibly imagine, and it's so easy to get lost in. The expansive cardioid connection could also be a link to the cardinals of the Vatican, just something else to consider. So with all this knowledge coming together, I really hope you're beginning to see that we are capable of so much more than we're being led to believe. And we can use this knowledge in a very practical way that can open you up and make you feel more alive and connected to the world and universe than ever before. You can tap into these harmonic physics of our reality and use them to reach that state of blissful coherence or crystalline, self-organizing Christ consciousness, where those implosive forces literally force your energy into equilibrium. And that equilibrium is, of course, the vector equilibrium, the geometry of the torus. You're not just aligning with one set of geometry here. True heart and brain coherence is aligning to an array of complex fractal geometries. And all of these vectors of intersecting geometries are the platonic solids nesting within each other, compressing in golden ratio into smaller and smaller scales, while simultaneously expanding your aura and drawing in more energy. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So for that implosion, there's also the ejection. And when it comes to angels, you could think of them like angles of electricity. And if they're all in harmony, you feel lighter, like you want to spread your wings and take flight. Think about how Jesus had 12 disciples. Just like there's 12 cranial nerves in the brain, and even more importantly, how the vector equilibrium of the torus has 12 spheres around one central sphere in the middle. You gotta be that central sphere. You're tapping into this black hole-like center of the torus, and by finding that black hole center of magnetism itself, you're becoming more whole, and you find your Holy Spirit by becoming whole at the center of your black hole. See what I mean? It's this negentropic centripetal force from the black hole center that feeds the white light of the third eye, literally increasing your charge and light force, radiating white light centered around the black hole vortex. It's like I showed in part 2 with the concept of meeting eye to eye to eye to eye, in the sense that your third eye connects to your heart's eye, which then connects to the earth and to the universe in a fractal black hole of wholeness or oneness. And one of my favorite visualization techniques is to simply imagine myself centered inside a giant pupil. And by being surrounded by that black hole-like space, it gives me a very expansive and balanced sensation of peace. So it's time to take our lives back, take our health back, take our connection to source back, while empowering our spines with enlivening charge. The simplest and most effective method of all for tapping into this alignment is just to feel love. You just gotta practice truly feeling that electric love of gratitude and happiness. And I know all too well how hard that can be, especially in such a demanding world. But it's up to us to take responsibility and just try as hard as we can to feel those emotions. Even if you're not actually in love with someone, like so many of us aren't, we can just imagine that we are, or even just find something else to be grateful for. I find feeling love for pets like dogs, cats, or puppies or kittens always helps, or just try really hard to go to your own happy place, no matter what or where that may be. Something my brother Brandon likes to say, I think is really great, is just to think about how so many people would give anything just to have vision or hearing or working legs or arms. And if you were offered millions of dollars to trade your own, would you? Chances are probably not. So there you go. You're already immensely rich if you think about it. So just start thinking like that and knowing that you really are. And by doing that, you actually start to feel that genuine love and gratitude just to be alive. Love is like the ultimate fractal vibration to connect you back to Om or Om. It opens you up and makes you feel at home in a sense. You're bringing back the Om and home, and feeling comfortable in your body with your mind at a peaceful, balanced state. I really like how Gabrielle Kelemen, who made the cymatics face, depicts the two polarities of the heart in this image and shows them embracing each other like lovers. I think this is what love naturally does, is harmonizing those polarities so they aren't clashing in chaos anymore. Let's not forget cymatics and the power of sound or harmonic vibrations and great music that you love to be a powerful tool as well. Just like we can get that same pine cone pattern from harmonic sound, and that same pattern is also the golden ratio flower-like pattern of electromagnetism, which is also the pattern of our torus. It just goes to show that the power of sound can force our energy into a balanced state. So use the power of your voice to sing or hum or create a mantra to tap into that vibrational harmony. It's like I showed how the two polarities become one when each side of the pine cone-like spirals align together. And this is why I like to think of the spinal cord as in a musical chord, which I covered in part 1. And then the spelling of the word spine fits so well with all of this in the sense that it starts with the letter S for the snake-like flow of the torus, then has the word spin as well as pine, meaning the spinning energy of the pine cone-like shaped spirals. It's just an interesting correlation. If you find yourself with too much anxiety to meditate, I've realized that the majority of times, at least for myself, anxiety is simply unused energy. So I just try and work out or do some yoga, maybe go work on one of my passions like music or skateboarding, art, or just anything to help channel that energy into something productive. And before you know it, you could be feeling so much more like yourself, as well as in much more of a relaxed state to meditate. I love to use tuning fork therapy also to help balance my energy, and if you've never tried it, it's really quite amazing how effective they are. And I call it a mental massage because you can really feel those vibrations in your brain. And not only does it feel like a tingly massage, it also increases your awareness of that energy dramatically. I even bring them to work and people ask me to heal them all the time. My favorite thing to do with them is just slowly move them around someone's head aligned with the ears. Or you can just do it to yourself, though it's not as effective because you can't relax as well. But it still is very helpful either way. And you can find a cheap tuning fork online or Amazon for like $15 if you want to just try it out. And then you can upgrade with more down the road or buy a nice set if you like. I personally like the lower frequencies best, like 128 or 136 hertz, but there's several to experiment with. And you can hear it here. So when you manage to make that 90-degree phase shift, you're creating a pressure condition of what's called a longitudinal wave, rather than the normal transverse waves. And I'll show you what I mean with this classic video from Bill Nye that I remembered from when I was a kid.
Waves don't always move like this. Now, sometimes they move like this. They squeeze together and spread apart. That's how waves go through something like the spring. Watch. I'll squeeze this end and let go. See, there's a wave going through the spring just by squeezing and spreading. There's no motion up and down. It's the same way sound waves travel through the air. Air molecules bump into each other, so some places they're close together, and other places they're spread far apart. The air molecules are moving kind of like these pool balls.
Midnight Soda Bill needs this shot. Oh! 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 Oh!
It's kind of like that. Kind of like the pool balls, not exactly. As I was saying, sound waves can travel through the air the same way waves can travel through billiard balls. Okay, here we go. Here we go.
Midnight Soda tries it again. He's got it!
There, it worked. That's because the billiard balls were close together. Now, the molecules in air, well, they're very close together, so sound travels great.
So when these implosive forces compress your energy fields in those balanced golden or phi ratio spirals, it condenses the fields to the point that it's a lot like how when Bill hit the pool balls when they were all connected. Basically, you can think about your energy being so compressed and connected that it forms a sort of invisible crystalline lattice that allows these intricate geometries to flow effortlessly and can also harmonize with the power of sound and your loving emotions to expand that pulsing beat of the heart tremendously throughout your increasing torus or vibrantly charged aura. It's like going from a piece of coal to a diamond and learning to shine the way your soul was truly meant to. And when all that light energy compresses, it's like going from an expanded flashlight to a compressed laser beam. I think this reaction here of magnets snapping into alignment like that is another good visual, whereas if they were too spread apart, this wouldn't be possible. It's like your energy just coming together and aligning and shooting up the spine. Just like we see today with the tremendous power of nanotechnology like carbon nanotubes, it's that same hexagonal crystal-like lattice that allows charge to compress and increase exponentially. And the further you can learn to scale down that geometric order and expand it with your focused intentions and emotions, then the more energy of source you will have filling you with life force. I like to think of energy as energy, meaning inner geometry, as well as energy like the life force chi of China. I also think that energy and energy connection goes great with energy as inner golden spirals. And as I mentioned before, the soul is golden, right? And just like those pool balls connecting in a line, your spine becomes that line in a way. And as Colin Smith has shown through the etymology of the word Kundalini, it is very much connected with a line. So think of Kundalini as cone de line, or cones of a line, or cones and a line, meaning those two conical vortexes force energy into a central line for the longitudinal waves to move through. In addition to this Kundalini line connection, and what I mentioned about the Holy Spirit becoming whole at the center of the black hole of electromagnetism, I think this all ties in perfectly with the Holy Grail, if you think of it as holy being the black hole center again, and for the Grail part, think of it as G-rail, or G for golden ratio spirals around the center rail-like line of Kundalini. Another of Colin Smith's discoveries was placing the Holy Grail at the center of the brain like you see here. And even though I know he's gonna hate me for saying this, since he's not a fan of Dan whatsoever, but I think it goes perfectly with Dan Winter's Holy Grail model. You can see how Dan's model shows these converging golden ratio spirals like those magnetic bowls or cup shapes of the torus continually flowing. And if you think about the classic phrase, "let thy cup runneth over," then this is perfect in the sense that your magnetic cup is overflowing with charge or light energy. And this energy flows right around those horn-like ventricles of the brain, which I showed also resembled a number 9 from the right angle. Perhaps you follow the 9 to literally get to cloud 9. And just like you see the hieroglyphs here showing that balanced Ankh symbolism centered within a bowl at the bottom, I think that's the magnetic bowl or cup shape of the torus. And we just got to change our perception of what we think of as empty space in the universe as actually being completely filled with magnetism and electric charge. These magnetic forces are the ether itself, as Ken Wheeler says. And that seems to be a gigantic mistake by modern science to completely disregard the ether as being non-existent. Each of those 3 key energy centers, or Dantian points, that I covered in part 2 are like the body's electromagnetic centers, with the heart being the middle, and the head being the north pole, and the gut, aka gut brain, being the south pole. And I find it fascinating how these 3 are also each a brain in a sense. We've learned about our gut brain and how it can affect our thoughts and emotions, possibly even more than our regular brain. Also, our heart has been shown in recent studies to not only contain neural network cells just like our brain, but also seems to make decisions even before our regular brain does. So who would have guessed that the brain in our heads could have the least influence on our bodies? And what I'm getting at is that you can provide the right nutrition in these energy centers and they will harmonize automatically, and you will feel great without even trying. Try to understand more than ever just how important it is to fuel your body with the proper nutrition. And let thy food be thy medicine, as the popular quote goes. In relation to the 3 energy centers, I found several images of what's known as a seraph, or seraphim, and my interpretation is that they're portraying the 3 energy centers, or Dantian points, where electromagnetic charge crosses polarities. Wikipedia explains that the seraphim are related to the Egyptian Uraeus, which is basically the original Kundalini serpent's name, and it also says that in their stories they would cry out 3 times, "Holy, holy, holy," making me think once again it's referring to the 3 whole-like energy centers. I also noticed a lot of them had those same eye symbols all over them, like we saw with the third eye, toroidal awareness, and peacock symbolism. An interesting correlation is how these 3 energy centers and the seraphim seem to show a similar relationship to cell mitosis, or cell division. If you disregard those added blue dots there and just look at the main points of compressed electric charge, they look just like chakra points and line up pretty well with those crossing wings. Adding to the mystery, I also noticed that same cell division image seems to form a basic outline of the cardioid as it makes its transition into two separate cells, which could show a link between the way the torus splits into two compared to the way that the cell divides into two, possibly a fractal relationship. And finally, I couldn't help but see an underlying cube influence of cell division, possibly revealing that 90-degree angle connection to electricity. Now let's touch on raising your vibration. Though I understand the concept of raising your vibration has many beneficial facets and meanings, but I think what we need to really be focusing on is not just raising our vibration, but raising our overall fractality and becoming more in tune with these fractal physics that can possibly make or break our lives and spirit, making us more whole and at peace. And now this next part is absolutely crucial. So we gotta get up at the crack of dawn every morning, even if it's freezing outside, and do what every culture around the ancient world was doing to gain that natural vitality. And that's allowing your butthole to soak up all that nourishing sunlight. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's another joke. But you see, that's another key, is to keep a good sense of humor. I'm a goofball at heart, and people might not like that side of me, and a lot of people think if I'm going to teach this kind of material, I need to be all serious all the time. But I say screw that. Real spirituality is about being who you really are, the spirit that you naturally are. So that's exactly who I'm going to be, and who you should be too. Alright, well, even though I have so much more I could share with you, I'm sure you're already overloaded with such a fast-paced presentation. But I really hope you enjoyed it, because it obviously took an unbelievable amount of time and effort to put together. But it's beyond worth it when I get to see how much this work makes other people's lives better, and shows them there's a much more incredible side of our existence than meets the eye. I sure don't do it for the money, but it absolutely does help, and unfortunately is necessary just to get by in this world. So if you can afford to help me keep going, any and all donations are greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for watching our scientific spiritual world, and you know the drill. Please like and subscribe, as well as hit the bell button to receive notifications of my future videos. And if you could help share this and spread it around, that would be awesome. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Simo out.